This is a download from the BBC. To find out more and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. Or should that be allo, allo?
Listen very carefully. I will say this only once, feedback peoples.
Did the Book of the Week slip into parody with its portrayal of the life of a mysterious French politician?
It made what should have been a serious insight into the late president into a Allo Allo programme.
Also this week, the controller of Radio 2, Bob Shannon, or do I mean Chenon, tells us why he's overhauled the station's Sunday night schedule and upset some big band fans.
Anything we do on Radio 2 to change the schedule is going to upset somebody. There's nothing that we do on Radio 2 that we're not proud of, but we have got an imperative to change. There's no doubt about that.
And please don't switch off when you hear this. That four-note piano motif from Andrew Dilnott's A History of Britain in Numbers drove many listeners to distraction. The programme's executive producer tells us the thinking behind the plinking. But first...
My castaway this week is the Labour leader Ed Miliband. He's been in charge of his party for 3 years.
What's the point of having an active politician on the desert island? Won't the resulting programme merely be part of a political PR operation? That's what several listeners thought happened when the Labour leader Ed Miliband appeared on the show. He certainly wasn't chosen for his scintillating choice of music.
I remember going to the school disco, and I'm sure this was playing, and wearing an extremely bad pair of white trousers and a purple jumper, and it's no wonder I didn't pull, given that.
Hello, my name is Josiane Boutonnet. I got the distinct feeling that Kirsty Young was not relating to her speaker at all. She was, in my view, unusually and unnecessarily acerbic, to the point that the tone was reminiscent of the Today programme, and not at all appropriate for this programme.
Increasingly, indeed, just opened my paper this morning and there it was, the dysfunctional relationship that is apparently at the heart of your Labour shadow front bench between you and Ed Balls. People are saying you don't get on, you're antagonistic, it's fraught, you disagree on how policy should be represented, you're criticising the way he's doing it. What do you say?
It's not right.
Badly done, Kirsty. Badly done.
Hello, my name's James Hawkes. I live in Longridge in Lancashire. There's an increasing and unwelcome tendency to approach an appearance by anybody with a political or current affairs background as an opportunity for an in-depth political interview. It seems to me that given the approach Kirsty Young took to the interview, her question about whether his list of music had been vetted by his advisors was particularly disingenuous.
This list that we're about to hear, how many people have cast their eye over it and how much is it your list?
It's absolutely my list.
If she is going to treat the interview like an appearance on the Today programme, how does she suggest that he approach it?
My name's Steve Tye. Desert Island Discs is broadly a politics-free zone. So, whose idea was it to ask Ed Miliband on today's programme about the Falkirk imbroglio?
Why are you not having an open inquiry on Falkirk?
Well, we've done an inquiry.
An open inquiry.
And it was really important to say this, Kirsty. We've taken the strongest action in that constituency, and we're determined to uphold the good name
but
of
why
the
should
Labour,
that need to be secret?
Why
Why should that need to be secret?
Because
It would be interesting to hear why the matter was raised at all. Could you ask the question?
Well, Steve, I can, but will anyone answer when I do? It's our job to ask questions, and there are plenty to put to those in charge of Desert Island Discs. For example, why have politicians as castaways at all if their personal life is inevitably spun through a lens of political expediency? Unfortunately, no one was available for interview, but they did send us a statement.
Throughout its 71-year history, Desert Island Discs has interviewed castaways from across the political spectrum, including a long list of leaders of the opposition. The aim of the interview is always to find out more about the person, both about their professional life and their personal life. When our guests are politicians, there will naturally be questions about their record, decisions and judgments, insofar as these provide a valuable insight into what makes the person tick. However, Desert Island Discs is predominantly a personal interview, conducted in a conversational way with a different tone, flavour and emphasis from a political interview, providing a very different experience for listeners.
Now, wouldn't it be interesting to conduct an interview with the producers about that statement? Unfortunately, they could not find the time to do one. So here's an open invitation to them. I'll go anywhere, anytime, day or night, to do such an interview. Come on, you know you should. Now, Radio 2 is undoubtedly a BBC success story. It's the nation's most popular station with around 15 million people tuning in. So, why make changes? Well, the station's controller, Bob Shannon, recently introduced a raft of them, most significantly to Sunday nights, where the Russell Davies Song Show has been replaced by an extra hour of Claire Teal, who has also absorbed another favourite of fans of easy listening, the Big Band Special. A number of other programmes, including Nigel Ogden's The Organist Entertains and Listen to the Band, have been moved to later slots to accommodate an extra hour of Joe Wiley's nightly weekday show. All of which has left a number of you baffled and bereft.
My name is Roger Haywood. I live in North Wales. I was amazed at the decision to drop the Russell Davies Radio 2 programme. I've been a loyal supporter of the BBC all my life, but on this, I think the BBC has made a big mistake. And I'm just hoping that the new show that he'll be presenting in December will be just as good.
Hello, my name is Rachel Puddick. Sunday evenings on Radio 2 used to be an incomparable period of calm. But with the loss of Sunday Half Hour, then Alan Titchmarsh, now Russell Davies and David Jacobs, you have more or less obliterated a genre of music which gave enormous pleasure to me and my friends.
Hello, I'm Sophie Harris from Brighton. I felt sad when I heard that the Big Band Special was going and that the Organist Entertains and Listen to the Band were being moved to late at night. I thought I only liked pop music, but that little half-hour slot from 9:30 to 10 got me listening to things I wouldn't normally listen to.
So what were the reasons for these changes? There's only one man who can answer that. The man who made them. The controller of Radio 2 himself, Bob Shannon.
I suppose there are three key reasons why you change the schedule or you change programmes. One is if you feel the programme is stale or needs to be refreshed, or it's time for it to be developed and moved on. Another might be audience performance, if it's lagging behind or it's seen some decline. And the third is the financial imperative to save money. And the backdrop is, for all of us in the BBC, and I'm sure you've talked to other people in BBC Radio about this, that since the last licence fee settlement, we're required to take 20% out of the Radio 2 cost base, which is a very significant amount of money. And in truth, Sunday evening schedule has always been made up of quite short programmes. So we had a 90-minute programme, followed by a 30-minute programme, followed by 3 one-hour programmes. That's quite a rich and quite an expensive way of delivering the musical repertoire. So instead, on a Sunday evening, we now have 2 two-hour programmes, one of which is live, and a 1-hour programme with Don Black until midnight. That makes it more cost-effective.
May make it more cost-effective, but does it make it as attractive? Some of your listeners, Mary Phillips and others, have suggested that the new Sunday evening music schedule is not appealing to her age group.
I am concerned that there is now no light music on Sunday evenings. Michael Ball is pleasant enough, but his programme is just a copy of so many others. I am beginning to feel that there should be a station, especially for the over 60s.
I'd have to say that what we do on a Sunday evening is not replicated by other pop music radio services. The Michael Ball programme and the Claire Teal programme and Don Black really are totally distinct from anybody else.
But isn't that the point, that you only do these programmes? So when you change them, when you put them later, the audience that loves them has nowhere else to go to get them. And in public service terms, surely what you have to do is provide those things which commercial stations do not.
Well, a few points to make. Firstly, Russell Davies, who's been a key pillar of our Sunday evening schedule, is not leaving Radio 2. In fact, next week he returns to Radio 2 with a new multi-part series on Monday evenings. Secondly, we have more older listeners tuning in for longer than ever before on Radio 2 at the moment, which is a really encouraging sign. And thirdly, Sunday evenings are in transition. You know, the Claire Teal programme has only just begun. We have no audience figures so far. We do know that Michael Ball is performing very well, so I think the signs are relatively encouraging. I do appreciate this change disturbs people's habits and expectations of radio. anything we do on Radio 2 to change the schedule is going to upset somebody. There's nothing that we do on Radio 2 that we're not proud of, but we have got an imperative to change. There's no doubt about that.
Well, let me specifically ask you about a presenter, Russell Davies. Now, I know Russell Davies is coming back in another form, but why did you decide to remove him as a weekly presenter?
Primarily in order to save money, but also because over a period of time we've seen that the audience figures on Sundays at that time have stagnated. I hope that we'll be able to give Russell a new slot which will enable him to reach a new as well as his existing audience.
You see, he's given an interview in which he says, I think there's a cultural shift going on. I don't know why they're doing it. It seems to be at the expense of people who know anything before the Beatles. Is there a cultural shift going on?
No, there's not. But Russell's expertise is very important to Radio 2, and that's why he is staying with Radio 2, and that's why we did not want to lose him entirely from the schedule. But the Sunday evening schedule was not working, and the programme was relatively expensive to make, and therefore there was an opportunity for us to refresh Russell Davies's contribution to Radio 2 and save money.
And what about the point from Rachel Puddick, who says you've more or less obliterated a genre of music which gave enormous pleasure to me and my friends, so is this the end of easy listening on Radio 2?
Well, as I said, Russell himself will return. There'll be 26 programmes from Russell Davies, plus there'll be other series around the schedule which I hope will reflect the kind of tastes that your correspondent shares with many other people. We're not trying to obliterate anything. We're trying to retain the range and breadth of programming, the reflection of a wide range of genre on Radio 2 that no other broadcaster comes close to reflecting. But we're trying to do it with several £1 million fewer.
Now, we've heard from Sophie Harris about the moving of the popular 9:30pm weekday programmes like Listen to the Band and Nigel Ogden's The Organist Entertains to much later in the evening, 11 and 11:30 on Monday nights, which is virtually the middle of the night to some listeners.
Well, 11 o'clock isn't the middle of the night, but we have caused some disturbance there, and I know these programmes have moved around the schedule on a number of occasions. I suppose the root cause of the problem is, in my bid to simplify the evening schedule, to have fewer and longer programmes, effectively, because around these changes, some programmes have gone from the schedule. I wanted to extend the live mid-evening programme Jo Whiley presents on Radio 2. Half-hour programmes are very difficult for us to place in that simplified schedule, so I decided that the best place for them was to be back-to-back in a 1-hour segment, and the only place to put them, therefore, was between 11 o'clock and 12 o'clock. So, in a sense, that movement, about 2 programmes, is all about the necessity of schedule change and the detail of finding a new shape to the evening schedule that's simplified, streamlined, but still gives that broad range of content, just with less volume of programming.
Can we then go on to the question of women presenters? Because you may have heard on feedback and you may have read what Jane Garvey said to us when she highlighted Radio 2 as having, shall we say, room for improvement in this area.
There are problems elsewhere in the BBC during daytime. Radio 2 still lacks a regular female voice between the hours of 7 in the morning and quite late into the evening.
Jane is quite right about daytime Radio 2, and I'll come to that in a second, but I think it's really, really important to recognise that in the past few years we've brought a whole host of new female broadcasters to the network. So, Vanessa Feltz has her own show, Early Breakfast. Jo Whiley's come from Radio 1 to the mid-evenings. Sarah Cox is the most recent addition with Sounds of the 80s. Diane Louise Jordan and Claire Balding we've talked about before. We have Annika Rice doing breakfast time on Saturdays.
But in situations like this, what a person like you always does is very properly put forward the numbers of people or the names of people, women who are doing these things. But overall, if you talk about the balance, it's far from 50-50, and it's far from 50-50 in daytime, isn't it?
Now, in terms of daytime, I've made a very deliberate decision to ask Zoe Ball to be our DEP when Chris Evans is away for 10 weeks a year. I've asked Claudia Winkleman to DEP for Ken Bruce. You know Vanessa Feltz DEPs regularly for Jeremy Vine at lunchtime. But what you've got to understand about these daytime programmes is that they are massively popular with huge numbers of people. Chris Evans has an audience nearly the size of Radio 1. Ken Bruce has an audience of over 8 million people who adore his programme and adore listening to him present. Jeremy Vine's programme is the biggest current affairs show on BBC Radio. Simon Mayo at Drive Time has a bigger audience than we've ever achieved at Drive Time.
So until they move on, in whatever form, you're saying in those key roles, you're not going to push women.
I think the really important thing is for us to recognise the practicality of the situation that we're in. We have a fantastically successful radio station, and I'm working really hard to make sure that we augment those big stars in daytime with a whole raft of other stars, and there are some other men that I could refer to who've also joined the network, so that when the time comes when a change is made, we have the best possible selection from whom to choose.
Finally, can I talk not about the programmes, but about the interruptions in their broadcast? A few weeks ago, we heard from listeners who had received a double dose of Bob Harris when the clocks went back. They heard this for 20 minutes.
He's coming from the West End. Bob Harris
We were sent a statement about the problems with Radio 2's playout system, but listener Michael Brooks felt the statement didn't tell the whole story.
In your item on the problems Radio 2 had at the clock's change, you didn't elicit for us exactly what was the playout system that was blamed for the error. So what does the playout system actually do? How does it work? And what other BBC programmes or radio stations use it? We should be told.
Well, the playout system is an automatic playout system, which enables programmes, whether they're live or pre-recorded, automatically to be broadcast. It's not a particularly peculiar system to Radio 2. Most radio stations employ a similar kind of means of broadcasting. And in truth, the system itself is not the problem. The amount of change that we've introduced to the network and the way it takes people time to acclimatise to using new systems and new ways of working has been at the root cause of the problem.
So it's human error.
It's
human error.
It's human error. The truth is that Bob Harris moment was excruciatingly embarrassing. It was terribly embarrassing for Bob. It is largely a pre-recorded programme and has been for a long time, as many programmes at that time of night are. All I can do about that is to say that was down to human error and to apologise for it. We've had too many examples of this on Radio 2. It's something we're taking very seriously. We need to address because although our programmes are brilliant, we need to make them audible to our audiences.
Bob Shannon, the controller of Radio 2. And don't forget, if you have any comments about any BBC radio network or BBC policy, you can write to us at Feedback, PO Box 67234, London SE1P 4AX, or leave a phone message on 03 333 444 544. Standard landline charges apply, but it could cost more on some mobile networks. Or, of course, you can send an email to feedback@bbc.co.uk, or you can tweet us at bbcr4feedback. All those details are on our website. Now, François Mitterrand dominated French politics in the late 20th century. He was the longest-serving president of France, serving between 1981 and 1995, and a man of baffling contradictions, both political and personal. He served under the collaborationist Vichy regime in the Second World War, then joined the Resistance, before becoming leader of the French Socialists. He was also married to the same woman for 52 years, pursued other women voraciously, and kept the existence of a long-term mistress and their daughter out of the public eye until his funeral. Plenty there to make a rollicking good book of the week, not least because it was read by the great Henry Goodman. Should have been a surefire hit, but for many listeners it was marred by cod French accents.
David Booth, listening to Book of the Week about the double life led by President Mitterrand, I was struck by the ridiculous French accents of the narrators.
He was exasperated by those young cretins from the Cognac family. They could not pass their baccalaureate. They were hopeless.
They sounded like an audition for Allure, Allure, and I half expected René to come on and tell us all the background story.
My name's Don Howe. I haven't read Philip Short's book, but I'm pretty damn sure that in writing it he did not represent his translations of French dialogue as being uttered in phoneticized franglais accents.
Hello, my name is Martine Kozlowski, and I am French-born, and French is my native tongue. This was an utter disaster. It made what should have been a serious insight into the late president into a Allo Allo program.
Thatcher spoke better French than Mitterrand spoke English, and with a strong accent which enchanted him. If you close your eyes, you could think she's Jane Birkin.
This was a farce. And it was utterly shameful. And so please, 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 promise me, BBC, that you will never, ever, ever do this again.
Oh dear, I'm not sure we can promise that. But why was it felt desirable for Henry Goodman to use a questionable French accent in voicing up all the dialogue in what is a dialogue-heavy book? The programme's producer told us,
"We always think carefully about how and when we use accents, our aim always being that they'll add something to the narrative. You need to bring the story and characters to life, and particularly with a book like Mitterrand, there's a Gallic shrug that us Brits just can't do justice to. Accents on radio can help with many things. They can create character, establish place, add colour and authenticity to a story. They can also act as a practical way to differentiate between characters and signify when it's speech rather than text. There's no exact science to this. The actor worked hard to bring each character to life with subtlety, and we hope that many people enjoyed it. But we're always interested to hear from audiences about how they receive it."
As are we, so do let them know. Now, Andrew Dilnot is a national treasure. There's one for Private Eye. He is universally respected as a man who gets his sums right. He is also the Warden of Nuffield College, Oxford, and Chairman of the UK Statistics Authority. He was the founder-presenter of Radio 4's More or Less, and has just finished presenting a 10-part series on this network, A History of Britain in Numbers. It traced the transformation of daily life by examining social trends and statistics.
Today, of every 1,000 children born alive, 4 die in their first year in this country. That's a rate of 4 infant deaths per 1,000 births. Let's go back. We hear the sound of infant deaths speed up. 1980. Twice as frequent as today.
The programmes have been very well received by critics and by some listeners, like Anne Bell.
I'd just like to say how much I am enjoying Andrew Dilnot's series, A History of Britain in Numbers. I think it is wonderful how so many seemingly disparate issues and facts are presented simply and in an engaging way, illustrating how connected the themes really are.
But, and it's a Ben Nevis-sized but, the repetition of variations on a 4-note piano motif throughout the 10 episodes has been driving many more listeners to distraction, and some to the off switch.
Hi, my name's Clive Wilson from Bournemouth. A History of Britain in Numbers. An interesting programme, but I had to turn it off. The plinking piano pointlessly used throughout was very annoying.
Throughout most of history, almost all jobs were manual.
It would be very nice if somebody came on from the production team to explain why they thought it was a good idea to have a piano plinking at intervals through the programme.
My name is Peter Bartlett. I live in Chertsey in Surrey. I very much enjoyed the History of Britain in Numbers, with one caveat. The irritant for me, the fly in the ointment, was the repetitive use of 4 piano notes. This increasingly jarred. And by the 3rd programme, I was finding it very, very difficult not to be very distracted by them. I think that's a great pity.
John Palmer, Bristol. I much enjoyed Andrew Dilnot's History of Britain in Numbers. Well, up until the time I could no longer stand the incessant blink, plonk, blink after each and every item. Was there a bored small child loose in the studio somewhere? No doubt some people like this sort of thing, but when it starts getting in the way of the actual information, is it really a good idea?
The series was made for Radio 4 by Whistledown Productions, the same company which makes Feedback. The executive producer of A History of Britain in Numbers is David Prest. I asked him whether there was a bored child loose in the studio.
There wasn't. I think the thing was about it is we were really overwhelmed with people saying how wonderful it was, and we really did feel very privileged to put this programme on. Just want to give credit to Sir Andrew Dilnot, the chairman of the
I'm sure you do. This is not in dispute. People thought the content was excellent. A lot of people thought the use of music spoiled it. In fact, some listeners switched off. Now,
I
you
don't
must,
think-
you must regret that.
It wasn't music, it was a 4-note progression. And there was a very good, valid reason for using it. I think it was just a great device to frame the really crucial statistics, because people make programs which involve statistics. The common complaint, and you'll know this, you've heard it as well, that statistics are slightly taken out of context, that statistics are slightly twisted, that listeners come in sort of halfway through the statistic mentally. And so what we were trying to do was to say, here's an important statistic. This is going to frame where we go for the next 4 or 5 minutes with Sir Andrew Dilnot's narrative. And I think we really used it as that sort of breathing space.
Well, I must interrupt at this point. You've explained why you used it, and obviously a very sensible thing to do in principle.
Yeah.
But the way it was executed had a very bad effect. I mean, you have people writing here, it sounded like water torture. That was Peter Bartlett. Peter Leonard saying, I felt like chucking a brick at the radio. So you've surely got to acknowledge that however noble and worthwhile your intentions, the execution had something to be desired.
I'm very sorry to all those people who were offended by it or felt patronised by it or felt that it got in the way. And, you know, we can all get irritated by what we hear on the radio. I think throwing a brick at the radio because they've heard 4-note progression, of which it was used to kind of just say no more than 4 times in each programme. I think what we tried to do, as I say, was give some breathing space, but there's also a very clever reason behind it. In itself, that little 4-note progression going up, going down, jumping up and down, there was an octave progression there. I'm no musician, but I sensed that there was something greater going on. It was almost trying to geometrically represent the fractions and the statistical progression.
Maybe that's your intention. It does sound, or will sound, I think, to some listeners, just a fraction pretentious. But you've also got to address the fact, for a significant number of the audience, a very good programme they enjoyed was damaged, in fact, in some instances, destroyed by the use of music.
But
for you simply to assert the music is wonderful isn't an answer to that.
I'm not saying it was. I'm saying that I respect people who were offended by it. I'm sorry if it was irritating to some people. We thought it was part and parcel of the fun involved in it. If you like, it was a bit like Ruth Maddock on her glockenspiel at the beginning of Heidi High going bing bong bing, now time for the knobbly knees. We were being a bit tongue-in-cheek. But as I say, I'm sorry if some people found it a bit irritating. I didn't think it was a significant part of the programme, and I really hope it doesn't distract from the wealth of information and the wealth of value that people got out of it.
David Prest, the executive producer of A History of Britain in Numbers. I'm sure that the presenter of that programme, Sir Andrew Dilnot, will soon be a guest on Desert Island Discs. And following Ed Miliband's appearance with Kirsty Young, I wonder who will be the next politician to appear on her show. David Cameron, Nick Clegg and Alex Salmond, of course, have already been interviewed. I wonder if UKIP do well in next year's European and local elections, whether Nigel Farage will be on his way to the desert island. With what music in his ears, I wonder. Goodbye.
By his advisers was particularly disingenuous.
This list that we're about to hear, how many people have cast their eye over it and how much is it your list?
It's absolutely my list.
If she is going to treat the interview like an appearance on the Today programme, how does she suggest that he approach it?
My name's Steve Tye. Desert Island Discs is broadly a politics-free zone. So, whose idea was it to ask Ed Miliband on today's programme about the Falkirk imbroglio?
Why are you not having an open inquiry on Falkirk?
Well, we've done an inquiry.
An open inquiry.
And it was really important to say this, Kirsty. We've taken the strongest action in that constituency, and we're determined to uphold the good name
but
of
why
the
should
Labour,
that need to be
of the Labour
secret?
Party.
Why should that need to be secret?
Because
it would be interesting to hear why the matter was raised at all. Could you ask the question?
Well, Steve, I can, but will anyone answer when I do? It's our job to ask questions, and there are plenty to put to those in charge of Desert Island Discs. For example, why have politicians... This is a download from the BBC. To find out more, and for our terms of use, please go to bbc.co.uk. Hello. Or should that be, allo, allo?
Listen very carefully. I will say this only once, feedback peoples.
Did the Book of the Week slip into parody with its portrayal of the life of a mysterious French politician?
It made what should have been a serious insight into the late president into a Allo Allo programme.
Also this week, the controller of Radio 2, Bob Shannon, or do I mean Chenon, tells us why he's overhauled the station's Sunday night schedule and upset some big band fans.
anything we do on Radio 2 to change the schedule is going to upset somebody. There's nothing that we do on Radio 2 that we're not proud of, but we have got an imperative to change. There's no doubt about that.
And please don't switch off when you hear this. That four-note piano motif from Andrew Dilnot's A History of Britain in Numbers drove many listeners to distraction. The programme's executive producer tells us the thinking behind the plinking. But first...
My castaway this week is the Labour leader Ed Miliband. He's been in charge of his party for...
What's the point of having an active politician on the desert island? Won't the resulting programme merely be part of a political PR operation? That's what several listeners thought happened when the Labour leader Ed Miliband appeared on the show. He certainly wasn't chosen for his scintillating choice of music.
I remember going to the school disco, and I'm sure this was playing, and wearing an extremely bad pair of white trousers and a purple jumper, and it's no wonder I didn't pull, given that.
Hello, my name is Josiane Boutonnet. I got the distinct...
Castaways at all, if their personal life is inevitably spun through a lens of political expediency. Unfortunately, no one was available for interview, but they did send us a statement.
Throughout its 71-year history, Desert Island Discs has interviewed castaways from across the political spectrum, including a long list of leaders of the opposition. The aim of the interview is always to find out more about the person, both about their professional life and their personal life. When our guests are politicians, there will naturally be questions about their record, decisions and judgments, insofar as these provide a valuable insight into what makes the person tick. However, Desert Island Discs is predominantly a personal interview, conducted in a conversational way with a different tone, flavour and emphasis from a political interview, providing a very different experience for listeners.
Now, wouldn't it be interesting to conduct an interview with the producers about that statement? Unfortunately...
feeling that Kirsty Young was not relating to her speaker at all. She was, in my view, unusually and unnecessarily acerbic, to the point that the tone was reminiscent of the Today programme, and not at all appropriate for this programme.
Increasingly, indeed, just opened my paper this morning and there it was, the dysfunctional relationship that is apparently at the heart of your Labour shadow front bench between you and Ed Balls. People are saying you don't get on, you're antagonistic, it's fraught, you disagree on how policy should be represented, you're criticising the way he's doing it. What do you say?
It's not right.
Badly done, Kirsty. Badly done.
Hello, my name's James Hawkes. I live in Longridge in Lancashire. There's an increasing and unwelcome tendency to approach an appearance by anybody with a political or current affairs background as an opportunity for an in-depth political interview. It seems to me that given the approach Kirsty Young took to the interview, her question about whether his list of music had been vetted